This one doesn't have page numbers, though.
Okay, then I won't.
I didn't see a second one down there. Shabbat Shalom. How is everyone this evening? It is wonderful to be together. I missed you all last week. Though it was fun celebrating Shabbat with camp, who, as far as I can tell, did not give me COVID. But I'll keep this around just in case. As wonderful as it is to be together, I hope you will join me in singing together on page 10. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. And we'll continue on the page. Ma yafeh hayom Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafeh hayom Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafeh hayom Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafeh hayom Shabbat Shalom. It is my pleasure to invite up Lois Goldberg for the lighting of our Shabbat candles this evening. And the blessings can be found on page 2.
Blessed art thou, Lord our God, creator of the universe, tell us as with this boat, and command us to kindle the lights of Shabbat.
Amen. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Let us turn to page 20. Lechatodi likras kalai yalalai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lechatodi likras kalai yalalai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad Ishmi'anu el ha'meyuchad Adonai אחד ושמו אחד, לשמו תפארת ולתהילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה. מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורי קומי אורי. אורי, אורי, שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. Verse 9. בואי ושלום מטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה. תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. Page 26. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברך חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל. בגלה, בגלה, ובזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם עולמי עלמיה. יתברך, יתברך, וישתבח, ויתפאר, ויתרומם, ויתנשא, ויתהדר, ויתעלה, ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעלמה, ויאמרו amen. We rise physically or spiritually as we turn to page 28 for the Baruch Hu. Yai, lai, lai, yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 lai. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, bechokma poteach she'arim, uvitbona mishane itim, umachalif et hazmanim, umisader et hakochavim b'mishmerotehem barakia kirtzono, bore yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, uma'avir yom umevi layla, umavdil ben yom uvein layla, Adonai tzivaot shemo, El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. On page 33, we pray together. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol, all these things your Torah gives to us, and the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works and the living language that gives it form? Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Please be seated. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'derech uv'shokbecha uv'kumecha uv'shartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha uv'ktavtam amizuzot beitecha uv'isharecha leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem lelohim ani Adonai Elohechem Elohechem emet. On the top of 39. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands, marching together. Ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha neta b'kodesh nora tehilot osefele Nora tehilot osefele Malechutecha ra'u vanecha Bokei ayam livnei Moshe u'Miriam Ze Elianu ve'amru Ze Elianu ve'ameru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Adonai yimloch yimloch leolam vaed. V'ne'amar ki fada Adonai et Yaakov, ugolo miyad chazach mimenu, Baruch ata Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Baruch ata Adonai, haporei sukat shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim. We sing together on page 44. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, Lasot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam berit olam. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, Lasot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, Oti leolam, oti leolam, Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, Lasot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz, Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, Lasot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, Lasot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam berit olam.
On page 45, we are a people in whom the past endures, in whom the present is inconceivable without moments gone by. The Exodus lasted a moment enduring forever. What happened once upon a time happens all the time. We rise for Tefillah, page 46. Adonai sifatai tiftachu v'yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanorah, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Koneh Hakol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot v'Imahot, U'Mevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, L'ma'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Leolam Adonai, Mechaye HaKol Atah Rav LeHoshia, Morid Hatal, Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Mechaye HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Ve'Rofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayehem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Baruch Baal Gevurot, Ubido Melech, Melech Memit Umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atal hachayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechaye hakol. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, Ukadoshim b'chol yom mihalelucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. You may be seated. On page 55. Disturb us, Adonai. Ruffle us from our complacency. Make us dissatisfied with the peace of ignorance, the quietude which arises from the shunning of the horror, the defeat, the bitterness, and the poverty, physical and spiritual, of humans. Shock us, Adonai. Deny for us the false Shabbat, which gives us the delusions of satisfaction amid a world of war and hatred. Wake us, O God, and shake us from the sweet and sad poignancies rendered by half-forgotten melodies and rubric prayers of yesteryears. Make us know that the border of the sanctuary is not the border of living, and the walls of your temples are not shelters from the winds of truth, justice, and reality. Disturb us, O God, and vex us. Let not your Shabbat be a day of torpor and slumber. Let it be a time to be stirred and spurred to action. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Retzeh, Retzeh, Retzeh Adonai Eloheinu, Be'amcha Yisrael, Utefilatam, Be'ahava tekabel, Utehi leratzon tamid, Utehi leratzon tamid, Avodat Yisrael Amecha, Baruch atah Adonai, She'otecha levadecha, Be'yira na'avod, She'otecha levadecha, Be'yira na'avod. On page 59. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more, we offer thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulacha na'eh lechodot. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech Adon, lechol hashalom. Ki atahu melech Adon, lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. V'tov b'necha levarech et Amcha Yisrael, Bechol eit uvechol sha'a, Bishlomecha. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Baruch atah Adonai, hamivarech et amo Yisrael Bashalom. We take a moment for our own reflections and the prayers of our hearts, or perhaps the words on page 62. Yehiyu l'ratzon imrefi v'hegyon libi lefanecha Adonai Tsuri v'goali Adonai Tsuri v'goali Yehiyu l'ratzon imrefi v'hegyon libi lefanecha Adonai Tsuri v'goali Adonai Tsuri v'goali. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts always be acceptable to you, Adonai, our rock and our Redeemer. We'll continue on page 244 as we prepare for our Torah service. En kamocha Elohim Adonai ve'en kamasecha malchutcha malchut. Please rise. Olamim umemshalcha bechol dor vador. Adonai melech Adonai melech Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Adonai oz le'amo yiten Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom ki mitzion tetzei Torah ki mitzion tetzei Torah udevar Adonai mirushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'amo Yisrael B'Kedushato Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo Gadlu Adonai Tihi Unromamai shemo yachdav, lecha Adonai hagedula, v'hagevura, v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach, v'hahod, ki tov b'shamayim u'va'aretz, ki tov b'shamayim u'va'aretz, lecha Adonai hamamlacha, yamit na'aseh lechol rosh. You may be seated if you are standing. Our Torah portion this evening is, try it so you can hear me. Our Torah portion this evening is Parshat Shalach Lecha, coming from the book of Numbers. And this portion contains the story of the 12 spies. God tells Moses to send a representative of each tribe to scout the land of Canaan. After 40 days, because we love the number 40, the spies return with a mixed report. They tell the people that the land is indeed good land, that its inhabitants are fearsome giants, next to whom they themselves looked like grasshoppers. Panic spreads throughout the camp as the rumor of the report spreads. Only Caleb and Joshua counter the negative stories, but to no avail. The people are convinced that they cannot take the land and begin to, guess what? Complain, asking, why is the Lord taking us to that land to fall by the sword? Let us head back to Egypt. We will be reading from page 981 in the Plaut Chumash, page 981. And in your regular prayer book on page 250, you will find the words for our Torah blessing, which we will join together. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach, Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah. I'll be beginning on verse 25. Vayashuvu mitor ha'aretz miketz 40 yom, v'yalchu v'yavo'u el Moshe v'el Aharon v'el kol adat b'nei Yisrael el midbar paran kadesha v'yashivu otam devar v'et kol ha'edah v'yerum et pri ha'aretz v'yisapru lo v'amru ba'anu el ha'aretz asher shalachtanu v'gam zvach halav udvash hi ze periyah efes ki az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz v'harim b'tzurot gedolot me'od v'gam yelidei ha'anak ra'inu sham Amalek yoshev ba'aretz hanegev v'hachiti v'hayevusi v'ha'amori yoshev bahar v'haknaani yoshev al hayam v'al yad hayardain v'yachas kalev et ha'am el Moshe v'yomer ole na'aleh v'yarashnu ota ki yachol nuchal la. I wanted to end on a happy note. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting the land. They went straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. And they made the report to them and to the whole community, as they showed them the fruit of the land. This is what they told him. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there. Amalekites dwell in the Negev region. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Caleb hushed the people before God and said, "Let us, by all means, go up, and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it." Please join me again on page 250 for our second blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah. While the Torah is in our midst, it is an opportunity for us to think of those in our community who are in need of our prayers of healing, for our thoughts and our strength to be sent in their way. Mishiberach avotenu v'imotenu, mishivarech v'irapeh et hacholim. May the one who has blessed and kept our ancestors in every generation continue to bring blessing and healing to those among us in need of healing. We think especially of Catherine Cooper, Denise Rosenbaum, Rachel Magdalene, Sid Gross, Sharon Hatcher, Ken Andrews, Megan Turner, Penelope June Moyer, Julie Bainbridge, Ruth Hirsch, Maxine Rubin, Nassim Ben Rachel, Christina Lobertini Burks, Dave Cox, Jim Levinson, Larry Weinberger, Jody Weinberger, Jim Locke, Mitchell Quint, Gary Pacernick, Cicely Nathan, Linda Dean Harris, Jerry McDonald, Marty Sacker, and Bob Kahn, those we name in our heart, as well as those who you may call out loud if you would like as my hand goes around the room. Baruch atah Adonai Rofei HaCholim. Blessed are you, O God, who brings healing to all who are in need of healing. We join together in the words of Misha Berach on page 253. Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu mekor habracha le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. We turn to the right side of the page on 272 as we prepare to lift and dress the Torah. Please rise. V'zot haTorah asher sa Moshe l'fnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai eirav Moshe.
So I sat at camp last week in a session with some of the middle school campers where their counselors were asking them how they would respond to different scenarios. And without going through the whole educational session with you, one of the groups ended up essentially debating the question, would it be easier to stand up to bullying if it were somebody else who were the target and you were the bystander, or if you were the target of the bullying? And from their middle school perspectives, they brought standard arguments that you might imagine. And on the one side, one camper chimed in that it would certainly be easier to stand up for somebody else because at the end of it, you get to walk away from the bully and the bullied person. It's not your life. You don't have as much of a stake in the game. To which, of course, another camper chimed in on the opposite side that that is precisely what makes it easier not to act in that situation because your life and your well-being aren't at stake. But when it's you that are being bullied and your life and your emotions, that it's easier to act. Rabbis across the country are speaking tonight about the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, which I believe puts 23 states with trigger laws in place that go into effect, and other states like ours who are poised to put legislation into effect, and thus implicating health care for pregnant people across the country or those who may become pregnant. I have been flooded, or namely my inbox has been flooded, from different organizations with Jewish responses to why Judaism supports abortion, texts we have, and why we need to fight for reproductive rights. And I could go into a very, very, very long lecture on this topic. I could, but I'm not. I don't need to tell you what Judaism says or doesn't say about abortion and reproductive rights. There are those in our community for whom this topic is akin to standing up for themselves. And there are those for whom it might feel more like standing up for somebody else. Within our community, there are those who have had abortions or have otherwise terminated pregnancies. There are Jewish women who have done this with the help, financial and otherwise, from Jewish organizations and with the blessing of Judaism and Jewish tradition. And I am just as sure there are those within our community for whom they have decided against having an abortion, even for an unplanned, undesired, or medically complicated pregnancy. I have a younger brother precisely because my mom didn't terminate a pregnancy when her medical professionals told her she should. Within our community, I am sure there are those who have supported a pregnant person through making this choice, no matter what decision was made. Within our community, there are those who could never imagine having an abortion or supporting a loved one through one. Within our community, there are those who are ambivalent about the topic, for whom it's not touched home personally. But here's the important part. No matter where any of us fit in, it might make it easier to stand up. And it might make it harder to stand up precisely because it is or isn't as personal. Judaism doesn't care how hard or how easy or how personal or how not it is. Judaism teaches to not stand idly by. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa from our holiness code. There is literal dam re'echa, the blood of our fellows, on the line here. Rabbi Leah Berkowitz wrote or shared a piece amid all of those flooding of my inbox sources, where she wrote, terminating a pregnancy is a deeply personal decision and also a medical decision and should be treated like any other medical decision. And she suggests that we ought to look to our partners, our family, our faith, our community for guidance and support, but that at the end of the day, our legislators shouldn't be in that doctor's room with us. We've known for a while that the Supreme Court would be making a decision. Over the past several months, over the past several years, I've been in conversations with people about whether or not our legislators have a say in this. Should this be decided on the federal level? Should this be decided on the state level? Should this be decided by doctors and patients? And we can argue this tooth and nail. What worries me most, though, is not what today's decision means for abortion specifically, but the ripple effects, what it means for reproductive health care more broadly. Since some of those trigger laws, some of the legislation that's in the works, affects contraception and infertility treatments as well. That these are implicated in those state level legislation that's out there. I worry about the precedent it sets for gender affirming care and for our personal autonomy in general. If I, as a person with a uterus that can grow a baby, could potentially be forced to grow that fetus to save its not yet viable life, could we get to a point of being forced to donate blood, organs, being a living organ donor to save an actual life? And I could argue Jewishly that I ought to do these things, but ultimately I'd still have the free choice, the free will to choose. There's an interesting text where our sources on Pikuach Nefesh, on the preservation and the sanctity of life, come from, that's discussed in the tractate of the Talmud on Yom Kippur, where the rabbis, in their very rabbinic way, pose different scenarios, much like our campers at camp, and what you would do in those situations, specifically related to fasting. We all know we're supposed to fast on Yom Kippur, and there's the famous argument that these are the commandments that we should live by them, not die by them. And so if fasting on Yom Kippur endangers your life, you don't fast. But where's the line of what endangers our life? Now the rabbi's got to argue about that. And so who better to consult but a doctor, a medical professional of the time? And so the rabbis pose the question, if you've got an ill person, or they also use the example of a pregnant person, for whom there is a doctor that has been consulted, and the doctor says this person needs to eat, or they could die. And the ill or the pregnant person says, no, I don't. You can force them to eat, or strongly encourage them to eat. And then the Talmud flips the scenario around. If the medical professionals say no, this person could fast, they'd be okay. And the ill person says, no, I don't, I need food, feed me. Who wins the argument? Anybody want to guess? Exactly, the person who wants to eat. And the rabbis cite a piece from Proverbs that says, the heart knows the bitterness of the soul. As qualified as that medical professional is, only the individual truly knows what's going on in their own body. A pregnant person, according to the Talmud, is the ultimate authority on their own body. The ill person is the expert on their own body. They need to consult outside professionals, but ultimately they can be trusted to make their own decisions. In the wake of the Supreme Court's decision, we may feel like the person standing up for themselves. We may feel like the person standing up for somebody else. We may feel like the person on the sideline who doesn't really know what's going on or doesn't really feel like I have a say in the game. We all have our own experiences, our own opinions, and our own feelings on this matter. And we will all choose how to react, and hopefully our actions will be based in Jewish tradition. But I hope in the process that we recognize there are hearts that are embittered. There are real lives at stake here. In our portion this week, we read about 12 spies returning from scouting out the land. And it's one of my favorite portions. Looking at, on the one hand, these 10 scouts, these 10 spies that went in and saw the same land as Joshua and Caleb, but came back and gave a drastically different report. To those 10 spies who saw the land, who saw the challenges that it posed, and said, this is insurmountable. There's no way we can do it. They were gripped by fear and lacked faith despite all the miracles in Egypt that they just saw. Fear and anxiety overtook them. And then there was Caleb and Jacob, who saw the exact same thing as the other 10 spies, the other 10 scouts. And in places in sort of the dialogue when they come back, essentially say, yeah, we saw all of those challenges. We saw all of those things that could feel insurmountable. But we can trust in God and we can trust in our community. If God could do what God did in Egypt, God could do it again. And as I was reading this story today and throwing out most of what I was going to talk about, that idea came to mind of it feels like our work ahead could be insurmountable. It feels like there are so many challenges and things that face our community that we can stand up for. And I hope that we have the faith of Caleb and Joshua to say, yep, we've scoped out those issues. And yes, they're big, but that they are surmountable. I hope we see the urgent need to not stand idly by, to stand up for our neighbors' rights, for our own rights, to make our own healthcare decisions, to be in charge, to be the authority on our own bodies. I hope we all have the compassion to respond as we do this to the bitterness of each other's souls. Whatever the source of that bitterness, to recognize this isn't some theoretical legal thing, but an issue that touches each and every one of us in some way. And so as we go into this Shabbat, my blessing for you is that we have the faith, the strength, and the courage to follow Caleb and Joshua, or to be Caleb and Joshua, as we cross the seas ahead. Shabbat Shalom. And at this time, we will return our Torah to the Ark. I invite you to rise and turn to page 256.
Chaim hi lemachzikim ba v'tomecheha meushar deracheha darchei noam v'chol nativoteha shalom Ashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. On page 257 we find the words that are above our ark. I always like the opportunity for us to read them. Please join with me. God's Torah is perfect, reviving the soul. God's teaching is sure, making wise the simple. God's precepts are right, delighting the mind. God's mitzvot are clear, giving light to the eyes. God's word is pure, enduring forever. God's judgments are true and altogether just. We continue with Aleinu in the middle of page 282. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. You may be seated. On page 289, in nature's ebb and flow, God's eternal law abides. When tears dim our vision or grief clouds our understanding, we often lose sight of God's eternal plan. Yet we know that growth and decay, life and death all reveal a divine purpose. God, who is our support in the struggles of life, is also our hope in death. We have set God before us and shall not despair. In God's hands are the souls of all the living and the spirits of all flesh. Under God's protection we abide, and by God's love are we comforted. O life of our life, soul of our soul, cause your light to shine into our hearts and fill our spirits with abiding trust in you. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us. We are in a period of shloshim for Robert Weinman. We also remember those who died at this season and years past, those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. We are observing the yahrzeits for Peter Albert, Louis Barnett, Hannah Baum, Ruth Bergman, Eva Bremer, Audrey Cook, Marcella Nathan Ehrlich, Arthur Emhoff, Jenny Evans, Stanley Frank, Jacob Friesem, Liam Davison Gates, Janice Eisenberger Globinger, Judith Goldenberg, Ruth Goldstein, William B. Israel, Moise N. Jacobs, Lillian Manhai Lanzett, Emma Bierman Levine, Emmanuel D. Margolin, Magnus J. Margolis, Max G. Margolis, Jack Moss, Esther Elaine Neiman, Fanny Nierenberg, Alice Ullman, Ada Levinson Perelson, Joseph Resnick, Samuel Rosenthal, Gail Ruda, Ben Schottenstein, Mary Shaman, Jacob Staller, Lincoln White. If there are other names to be mentioned or perhaps pronounced more correctly, I invite you to please call those out as my hand goes past your eye. I invite all who are in mourning or who are remembering to rise in body or spirit. We turn to page 294, and we all rise together as we recite the words of the Mourner's Kaddish as a community. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, Ve'alma divrach rute v'yamlich mochute, ve'chayechon v'yomechon, uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael, va'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam ulalmei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal, shemei dekudsha barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran b'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, huya asei shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may their memories always and only be for a blessing. In just a moment, we will continue with our Kiddush and Motzi outside, but first we'll have a final song. You may be seated if you would like. All right, raise your hand if you want Adon Olam versus Ein Keloheinu. Adon Olam, Ein Keloheinu. Ein Keloheinu it is, page 322. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Micheloheinu, Michadonenu, Michemalkeinu, Michemoshienu, Nodal Eloheinu, Nodal Adonenu, Nodal Malkeinu, Nodal Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Shabbat Shalom. May we all be filled with the warmth and peace that Shabbat brings, and we'll join together in the hallway for Kiddush and Motzi.